Hi, it's Stephen here. Buy-to-let property investing remains one of the main investing strategies in the UK. I'm going to cover how to get started with your first buy-to-let property, how to make money as a buy-to-let investor, how to go and buy a buy-to-let property and what costs you need to be aware of, and how you can go from buying your first buy-to-let property and building your very own property portfolio. At the end of this video, I'm going to explain how you can build your own property portfolio without using any of your own money once you've bought your first buy-to-let property. I've been a property investor for over 20 years now, and I've bought and sold residential and commercial property in various countries, including the US and the UK. So let's get into it, and first things first, let's work out how you can make money with buy-to-let property. Now there's three key calculations that you need to understand if you want to become a property investor. Now the first one is net operating income. And this is where you take the operating income minus your operating expenses, and that figure equals your net operating income, or the NOI for short. So your operating income is typically the rent, and your operating expenses is everything else that you have to pay out for the ownership of that property. So it might be your mortgage, maintenance and repairs, insurance, property management, all of that type of stuff will be in the expenses column, and your income would typically be the rent, plus anything else that you can generate to make an income associated with that property. There might be ground rents associated with it, service charges associated with that type of thing would all add up to become your operating income. So you take the operating income from the operating expenses, and therefore you should always have a positive number. And that positive number means that you're making money with that property. If it isn't positive and it's a negative number, you move on and you look for a different property. That property isn't going to be positive cash flow, which essentially means you're going to be dipping into your pocket each month to maintain that property, to keep that property, which as a property investor, you don't want to do. So the next thing that we can work out is our return on investment, or yield. And now we use the net operating income divided by our purchase price times 100. Now this then gives us our return on investment. Timesing by 100 gives us our percentage, and we want this percentage to always be more than what we'd get by just having the money saved in the bank. Otherwise, what's the point? You're taking on additional risk when you can literally just have the money in the bank. There's no hassle, no aggravation, and it's getting a better savings rate, interest rate. This return on investment would typically be between 5% and 10%. Anything above 10% is pretty good. We've then got a calculation that a lot of people might not know about, which is cash on cash return. So this is an important one because this is actually showing you what the return is based on your cash down. So how we work this one out is our annualized cash back divided by the cash down times 100. And this gives us a percentage rate based on the amount of money that we put down. And for me, I always try and aim for a 10% cash on cash return. If I can achieve that, then I'm pretty happy with that property. There's various strategies that are out there that you can make money with property, and the two most popular ones would be BRRRR, which is where you buy, you refurbish, you refinance, you rent, and you kind of repeat, you keep doing that, and that's the way that you can essentially build a property portfolio, which I'll talk a bit more about later on in this video. An example of when I've done this is actually, it was my second investment property that I bought, and I bought this, was in London, it was in Zone 2, and it was a 2-bed duplex flat. And I bought this one and it needed refurbishing. It needed a new kitchen, it needed new flooring, it needed new lighting, new bathrooms. So I went and spent about 10 grand fixing all of those things up, and I got it already at about 10 grand less than what it should have been below market value. And so I was pretty happy with that. Spent that 10 grand on it, brought it up to really top standard by doing that, got the builders in before I lived in it or anything like that, or rented it out. And by doing that, I uplifted the value, and then I got it refinanced, and it refinanced quite a lot more, and I was able to refinance that loan, pay off the loan, and get back some money, and with that money I was able to then put that down on another property. So this is a strategy that a lot of buy-to-let investors try to do, but it means that you've got to buy right at the start, as in you've got to buy the right property at the start. You can't really turn always a lemon into lemonade, if you know what I mean. But the important thing here is trying to buy a property that has the potential to be getting that uplift if you spend a bit of money on refurbishing it. The other strategy is just simply where you buy a property and you hold it. You don't do anything to it when you buy it. You literally buy it in a rent-ready state, you rent it out, and from day one, it's positive cash flow. So that's why we need those calculations. We can work out, as part of our due diligence on buying that property, whether it will cash flow from day one. Has it got good tenant demand? Is it in a great location? Do I know what type of tenant will go and rent it? And therefore, I can just buy and hold it, and down the track, as the capital appreciates in that property, you can maybe then refinance it and then go and buy another one. But the key thing with all of this stuff is you need to be confident about the money that the tenant is going to be paying for the property that you're looking at. And the best way to do this is go and speak to agents. Now, don't always speak to the selling agent and ask them. Obviously do that, find out what they recommend, but go and ask another 2 agents, I would, in that area, and go, look, I'm looking at buying this property, what would it rent at? And they'll tell you at the end of the day, and you can go on their books and say you're an investor, and if they've got any properties, such and such, that they'll send your way as well, as a way for them to kind of give you some information about what the rental return could be on that particular property that they're not really associated with. But they might have similar properties on their books that you can go, well, what would be the rental for this one? What would be the rental for that one? And the more you focus on an area and a tenant profile, the sooner you'll understand what type of rents that you can be achieving for that property. Now, one trick I like to do if I don't know that area and I'm just looking is I use Rightmove. I just search for properties in that area that have already been let. I just click on the include let properties on the filter there, and that way I can then just easily see what actual properties have been let for what amount of money, because it tells me there on Rightmove. Being a buy-to-let investor, sometimes location is less important. It's about the numbers initially, and then you want to look at the location. So if the numbers stuck up, then look at the location and go, okay, does this make sense for an investment that I want to buy and hold, keep for the long term? Even if you refurbish it or whatever, essentially you're choosing to then keep that property and maintain it and whatever down the track, and hope that that property then will appreciate in value over time. And that's why it's important where you buy, because capital appreciation is like the cherry on top. You're buying a property that already from day one, positive cash flows. The cherry on top is that that property will appreciate in value. The sooner that it appreciates, the more often you can kind of leverage that property to go and do it again, buy more properties. So you want to be having that in mind about what's the location? Has it got good capital appreciation? Is it close to amenities? Is it got good demand for tenants? Is it a home occupier area, or is it a big rental area? So based on those things, you want to decide whether that's the type of thing that you want to buy. When generating money as a buy-to-let, you're going to also have to report your income to Inland Revenue. So any money you make will be taxed as an additional income to whatever income you're already generating through your job, maybe. Now we've understood about how we can make money with buy-to-let property, let's go and talk about how to actually go and buy a buy-to-let property. Buying a property as an investment requires you to have a specialised mortgage, which is called a buy-to-let mortgage. So you can't simply buy a property as a residential mortgage and rent it out. They don't allow that. You're going to need a deposit, typically of 20%, which means that the other 80% you'll be able to get as a buy-to-let mortgage from a lender. This can vary, and it could be only a 75% loan to value that you can get, which means that you'd need a bigger deposit of 25%. But here, where you need to get a mortgage for your buy-to-let property, you want to be using a broker ideally, and get a broker that has access to the whole of the market, which means that they're not just got some types of banks or lenders or financial institutions that they work with. They can do the whole of the market, and therefore they're not really biased to one way or another way just because they get more commission from those financial institutions. One of the best things about buy-to-let mortgages is that they're not based off your salary or your expenses, which is just like a normal residential mortgage would be. A buy-to-let mortgage is based off the rental income. So what you need to make sure with a buy-to-let property is that rental income will be generating more money than it costs to pay for the mortgage. So what the lenders do here is they have a stress test. based on the rental income to what the mortgage repayments would be. And they work it off 5% on an interest-only repayment. And the percentage here is typically from 125% up to 145% over the mortgage repayment amount. So what the lenders would do here, as an example, they would take the £75,000 mortgage times 5% equals 3,750. We divide that by 12, which equals then £312.50. Then we stress test that at the 125% interest rate, which then equals, we would need £390 per calendar month in a rental income to be able to qualify for that loan of £75,000 at the stress test rate of 125%. Now, to satisfy the lender that you can get that £390 per calendar month, what you'd need is a letter from someone that's registered with ALA. They'd write a letter to say that the income on that property would equal £390 per calendar month or above, ideally. Other criteria that some lenders may stipulate on you is that you do have to actually have another income of at least £25,000. And there may be some age limitations where you have to be 21 or 25 to be able to qualify for a buy-to-let mortgage. Some lenders also require that you already own your own property, but there's lenders out there that you don't need to own your own property, and your first property could be a buy-to-let property. You're also going to have money to pay for legal fees and also stamp duty. With a buy-to-let property, there's also an increase on the stamp duty. There's an additional surcharge of another 3% that you need to be mindful of. So whatever the stamp duty rate normally would be for that property, you need to add another 3% onto that, and that will be your stamp duty cost. A key consideration in the last few years has been about how to buy a buy-to-let property. What's the most tax efficient way to do that? How to structure yourself to be able to buy that property. So you can either buy the property in your own name or you can buy the property in a company. So it's been more tax efficient for high rate taxpayers to go and create a company to go and buy their buy-to-let properties with. And this is because companies are taxed at a rate of 19% currently at the time of recording, and the high rate taxpayers are taxed at over 40%. And also with buying in a company, you can offset other things like mortgage interest rates still. Whereas in an individual, if you're buying in an individual, you cannot offset the mortgage interest rate anymore on that property. So that's another incentive of why people would buy in a company. So there's going to be costs when you're buying a property. Now, we covered that there's going to be stamp duty. So this is going to be another 3% on the normal rate as if you're buying a residential mortgage. We've also got legal fees. Now, legal fees typically are probably between £1,000 and £2,000. You're going to have an arrangement fee which the lender imposes on you for just organising a loan, your mortgage. And this typically could be a fixed rate, something like £699, or it could be a fixed percentage rate. So it could be 1 or 2% of the actual loan amount. Now, this will vary by lender, and your broker will be able to advise you exactly what that arrangement fee would be. You're typically going to always have to pay a property valuation fee. This is the lender. They want to make sure that the property values up to the amount that you're paying for it. And that will be about £300, something like that. And then it's up to you if you want to then get something like a home buyer's report or building survey done. They're not normally mandatory, and they can be anywhere from about £500 upwards, depending on the location and the size of the property. So then once you own a buy-to-let property, you've got other costs that you need to be aware of. So typically you're going to engage a letting agent to go and find your tenant. So if they're just going to give you a tenant finding service, that could be something like 5% fee of the amount of rental income. If you want your property fully managed, that fee then will range up to 10% up to 15%, depending on the area, the type of property and the letting agent. You've also got some compliance things that you have to make sure you get done each year, and that would be like your gas safety certificate, your electrical safety certificate, and your EPC, your energy performance certificate. All of those things kind of range from £50 to £100 each of those things, and you typically will need to get them done each tenancy. There's also a tenant deposit scheme that you need to register the tenant's deposit with, which your letting agent can help you understand a bit more about how you go about that. And that typically is just about £20 to join some type of scheme where they look after the deposit and return the deposit to the tenant when the time comes, if everything's great and done correctly with the rental. And with this tenant deposit scheme, this is a legal obligation that every landlord has to do. You have to put the deposit in this type of scheme and give the details of that scheme to the tenant within 14 days. There's also landlord insurance costs that you can go and get. So you can get insurance for being a landlord and all the issues around tenants and living in your property and all that type of thing, which a lot of people take out. You're also going to have costs to do with property maintenance. So properties need repair, they need maintaining over time. Now you need to factor in that there's going to be some type of maintenance with owning a property that I'm sure you're kind of aware of because you probably live in a property now, whether you're renting or owning it, and you know that stuff degrades over time and it needs maintaining. So once you own that property, you'll be up for those types of costs and maintaining that property. If you own a leasehold property, then there's going to be other charges like ground rent, there might be service charges. These are typically in flats, and you're going to have to be mindful about what those ground rent costs will be. Ground rent's typically an annual charge, and the same with service charges, annualised, but they might split them over 2 or 3 or 4 times over the year to pay them in payment, like a payment plan. Those costs are normally with leasehold properties. As a freeholder, you don't have those types of costs, so you don't need to worry about those. Other things to be mindful of if you buy a property that's leasehold is you need to make sure there's no covenants or restrictions in there that say that you cannot rent out that property, because essentially that's what you want to do with that property. So you need to make sure that you can rent that property out using an assured short-hold tenancy and that there's no restrictions on doing that. There might be restrictions on some places don't let you do short-term stays like Airbnb. That's okay if you just want to do stuff on long-term rentals. These types of things you can ask from the selling agent. They should be able to tell you this type of stuff. If not, you'll have to rely on your solicitor picking that stuff up. But I would really try to push for that information before you go enter into any spending of any money with any solicitor, because the person selling the property will know this. You just ask the agent, who will then ask them, and you can get the information. If they say they don't know, or they can't find out, probably walk away, move on to the next property. So let's now cover how to build a profitable portfolio. You want to make sure that every property that you buy is positive cash flow. Now this will enable you to then down the track refinance that property as it also appreciates in value, or if you do some refurb to that property down the track. Before you refinance a property, you want to make sure that it will still be positive cash flow after you refinance that property. Because if you refinance it and then it's negative, that's not a great place to be in, because it's going to keep you in a job, it's going to keep you having to bring money out of your own pocket to maintain and keep that property, and therefore it's not really achieving why you wanted to get into property and invest in property in the first place, which ultimately for a lot of people is to become financially free, quit your day job and just invest and generate a passive income from property. Key consideration when you're buying properties, obviously the numbers, as I said before, but location's important. So make sure you get those 2 things right and you'll be able to build a profitable portfolio over time by buying property in good areas with good strong tenant demand that then appreciate in value. You want to get crystal clear on who your tenant is. So kind of come up with a tenant profile about who's your likely tenant to be for this type of property, and then go and buy properties for that type of tenant. Don't buy properties that suit you or that you would like to live in. You're buying them for that type of tenant. So that could be a student, it could be a professional couple, or it could be a family. So each of those have different wants and needs, and therefore they'll want a different type of property because they've got different needs. So families may want gardens, they want off-street parking. Professional couples want to live close to amenities, they want close to transport links, things like that. Students want to be close to their universities, walking distance to a lot of amenities. They're more about walking. Professional couples, transport. Families about the environment, gardens, the size of the house, schools, that type of thing. So they're important considerations when you're working out what type of property you want to be buying. When you're looking at properties to buy, do not get emotional about them. Let the numbers guide you. They'll tell you whether you should be buying that property or not whether you like the look of it or whether you think you can do stuff to it or you'd love to live there or you love the bathroom on that one or this kitchen's superb. It's irrelevant. You want to make sure that the numbers stack up, and therefore that will tell you whether you should buy that property or not. Now for me personally, I like to use capital and repayment mortgages. You can just get an interest only buy-to-let mortgage if you want to, and all the lenders will allow you to do that, because at the end of the day, they're making more money if you keep it as interest only, because you're never repaying any debt. But ultimately, the way to make money with having a property portfolio is to own property essentially debt-free as time progresses, because you can then have choices of what you want to do with your property portfolio. You can then leverage later against that property, because you can draw down that equity, release that equity out of it, and therefore go again. And it also looks good if you want to go and buy another property and your loan to value ratio on your property is a lower amount. You know, they're not all stuck at 80% loan to value. Another lender will come along and go, well, you need to repay some of that debt. Or if things go downwards in the property market and you're all highly leveraged, they may recall some of that debt because the bank wants some of the money now to mitigate its risk, because property prices have dropped 10%. Therefore, they could call on you and make you pay back that loan. So capital and repayment mortgage is my personal preference about what you want to do if you're investing in property. The rental income is essentially paying your mortgage, which I'm sure you're clear about that. So that is the benefit of having a buy-to-let property and using capital repayment mortgage. So you could essentially go buy this property, get a tenant in, it covers all the outgoings, it's positive cash flow, it puts a bit of money in your pocket each month, but it's paying down the mortgage. So after 25 years, you own that property debt-free. You don't have to do anything else on it. Get a property manager to fully manage it, just let it go. And then you can just go and buy another property, save up the deposit, or other ways that I'll talk to you about in a minute about how you can do that, and build up your property portfolio that way. Simply buying, hold, capital repayment, paying down the debt, 25 years time, by the time you're 50, if you're 25 now, you could own a whole swag of properties debt-free. Be mindful though that some lenders have restrictions on how many buy-to-let properties you can own. So they call this portfolio landlords, and that you can only own 4 buy-to-let properties at once for some lenders. Other lenders go up to 10, and other lenders again might not have any restrictions on this, and you can have unlimited amount of properties. This is why it's important to get a broker with a whole of the market that gives you the best option for what you want to do. So if you're always going to just say, well, I'm only really going to own 4, so it doesn't really matter if I go with a lender that has that limitation now. But if you're trying to grow, you want to get to 10 or 15 or 20, you might choose to go with a different lender, and it might be a slightly higher interest rate, but they don't have these limitations or restrictions, which will enable you to build up your property portfolio. So be mindful of that. Talk to your broker about what's the right thing for whatever your journey is to building up your own property portfolio. So the quickest way to build a property portfolio is to use other people's money, OPM. I'm sure you might have heard that term before. Now, other people's money is either a financial institution or even a seller. You could get the seller to finance your money. Now, once you bought your first property, you put your cash into that, you got some money into that. So that's cool. You refurbish it, add some value, get it refinanced, and then you get it refinanced at hopefully a higher amount than the money that you've put in, plus the mortgage that's in there. So then you get all of your money back out again that you put into that one, and it's still positive cash flow after that refinance. That's the important thing, that the rent is covering all of the expenses on that property. Otherwise you might not want to do it quite yet. You just have to work that out and see whether it's the right thing for you. You then, with the money that you come out of that, you're going to buy your second buy-to-let property. Now, with the money that that one generates, if that covers all of the mortgage payments for that one and tops up your first one, you may go, okay, I'm happy to that one makes a slight loss, but this one covers that loss plus this positive cash flow here. So between the two of them, you're still positive cash flow overall when you look at your operating income for both and your operating expenses for both. Therefore, if it's positive cash flow still for both, and you know that they're both capital appreciating and all that good stuff, then maybe you do that. But treading a fine line. If you can keep each one individually positive cash flow after refinancing, that's great. You're then going to build a healthy property portfolio. And this is the way you use other people's money, and you're not spending any more of your own money to build your property portfolio. You can just keep doing this again and again and again. making sure that you buy the right property that can appreciate in value if you do a small refurb on it. You can then use that money from the refinance to buy the next property because you've got that money as a deposit, the 20% deposit. And that's it. And that's exactly what I did when I started out and built up a portfolio in my 20s by just simply doing that strategy. Thanks so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. If you've watched it all the way through and you've enjoyed it, please consider subscribing if you haven't already. And don't forget to smash the like button to really help out my YouTube channel. If you want to follow me on Instagram and see what I'm up to over there, feel free to do that. And I'll see you next time.